and Dr. Finnegan was called. He was already living in Berkeley and was a professor at PSR, and he took over as the preacher and pastor with an assistant to carry on the administrative positions. His sermons were very well organized and ended on the dot of 12 o'clock. This choir is still marching in as usual. He had a pastorate of 25 years, and during that time, the church and churches in Berkeley went from a peak in about 1950 to 55, and then a gradual decline, and then we hit the 60s and the tumult on campus, and then down. By the time Dr. Finnegan left, we had an active membership of less than 100, and a little less formal. I don't remember exactly when all the changes came. There were three ministers and 3 interim, or was it 4 interims? And things went gradually down. By 1983, the choir was no longer in the choir loft. They were not wearing their robes every Sunday, and they came out and all stood in a row there. And it was very interesting. There was one lady who had sung in the choir since 1924, and there were a couple of high school girls. And I thought that was very nice, especially when I went to a church in Texas where they had a wonderfully matched choir. All the ladies had the same geriatric beige hairdo, and all their husbands marched in beside. I think they were probably more women than men in the choir, but so we gradually became more informal, because partly we were smaller. The first real sort of major thing that happened, a change, one more night at choir practice, and I don't remember just when this was, but say somewhere between 65 and on. During choir practice, a rock came through the window of the lower left-hand section of St. Paul and broke the window. If you look very carefully, you will notice that the glass there is not quite as finely designed as the rest of the windows. We got the stained glass windows in the first one, partly designed by Dr. Finnegan in the early 50s, and these 5 or 10 years, about 5 years later. And then one morning, we came to church, and they said, we're going to meet over at PSR. There'd been a fire. Somebody who either had a fetish for candles or didn't like churches, and we never knew which, had lit a few candles, and most of the fire was under the church, but the sanctuary was fully smoked. And if we hadn't been renting the student center to the suicide prevention, which was a 24-hour deal, we would probably have lost the building, because they heard the fire and called the fire department. So we had some structural damage, but mostly smoke damage. And we washed everything down. It was a really good work party. We lost all of the Sunday school materials, which were too smoked to reuse. And we went on through several pastors and smaller congregations and gradually less formal. And then was the earthquake. That was October 89. And, of course, it was centered over on the San Andreas Fault, which is San Francisco and down the peninsula. And I guess it was the next Thursday. The earthquake was on Friday. We worshipped here on Sunday. And I guess it was the next choir practice that Tom Elliott looked up at the beams and said, there's a crack in one of those beams. So, building inspections. And we learned that we had serious these beams had been stretched in some way in the motion of that earthquake. We sit fairly close to the Hayward Fault, and I don't know to what extent that affected us, but anyway. So we met downstairs in this fellowship hall, sitting in a big circle. Now, one big circle, so you can get some idea of the size of the congregation in '89. If you can make one circle of chairs, and we weren't pushing right against the wall, but it filled it nicely. And we worshiped there for about 2 or 3 years through the process of what is the damage, how are we going to finance it, getting the financing, doing the work. They were working on the roof when the big Berkeley fire occurred, and the plastic that they had fastened over the roof to keep out any fall rains blew off in the wind that accompanied that fire. We finally came back into the sanctuary, and see, before these bars and things up there around the window were not there. These poles for the flags were added about, I think, probably by that time, because that was the Greens' plan. I think it was probably Diana's idea and Bob's work that got those banner rods up. And also, before, this roof was some kind of gray composition. Not real dark gray, but not very light either. And that was painted by Bob Green and his son into white, and it has very much changed the aspect of the sanctuary. That was the last major addition. And that was, I think it was about that time also that we unscrewed the pews and moved them around. Before they were, nice square, straight pews with a aisle in the middle. So we have gone from extreme formality to quite informal. But the fellowship has still been good, and it has been an interesting experience to come.